So just
Okay.
a little bit of background just on how you got involved in this case and when that happened.
Back in 2006, I was asked to be involved in the reinvestigation of Christopher Wallace Biggie Smalls cold case murder. And as we began to unravel what happened in that murder, we became interested in a person named Keefe D. And we ultimately wanted to question Keefe D, but we knew that he wouldn't just be, naturally honest with us or forthright. So we built a case against him, a drug case, which we knew would compel him to sit down and potentially cooperate. That's what we did. We put essentially what was going to be a life sentence on him. And he agreed to sit down with his lawyer and with our investigative team and with the U.S. Attorney's Office and answer any questions that we had. So when we asked him about Biggie, he just basically said, listen, I knew Biggie, I knew Puffy, I kind of hung out with those guys. I don't know who murdered him. It's probably Suge. But what I can tell you about Las Vegas is a whole different story because we did that. And when he says Las Vegas, he's obviously referring to the murder of Tupac Shakur. And he then goes and explains in detail everything that led up to that murder and the murder the night of September 7th in 1996.
And what did you guys do with that information? Because you guys were not directly investigating that one, correct?
No, but when he told us about how it all unfolded, the solicitation to commit the murders had happened in Los Angeles, and so now we had some jurisdictional ownership. So when we sit down, but again, this is under what's known as a proffer agreement, and a proffer agreement is an agreement between an individual and in this case the U.S. Attorney's Office, where he can sit down, answer questions, but not have to fear having his own self-incriminating statements be used against him. So he's basically invoking his Fifth Amendment rights while telling you everything that he has to say in response to your questions. So that's why that happened in 2009. Well, then he begins to go out and publicly make those same claims and boast about his involvement for the ensuing years until ultimately he said so much he talked himself straight into jail.
And people look at that agreement, and what was the reasoning for that agreement that he could talk to you guys without fearing being incriminated against? What was kind of the basics of that?
Well, keep in mind we had built this very strong drug case against him, but that's not the reason that we did that. The reason we did that was try to solve these murders. And so our motivation was to solve these murders more than it was to pursue some drug prosecution. So it was an investigative strategy because we knew without any leverage over him, he was never going to just sit down and divulge information that incriminates himself.
And were you surprised, over these last few years, he's coming out and, was he just getting, I guess, thought he was untouchable? I know like the book, he put so many details out there. And I think it was just, what's your take on him, sitting across from a table with him, interrogating him?
He's just very arrogant. He's not very smart, but he's very arrogant. And so those two things were his undoing. He seemed to think that he had some type of blanket immunity, that because of our agreement, he was immune from prosecution. That was never the case. And how he misunderstood that is a mystery to me. But so essentially, like I said, he's talked himself straight into jail.
Were you surprised today? I think, this news coming out this morning kind of shocked the world. I mean, probably as much as it shocked him when he was killed. I think people didn't see this, coming today.
No, I knew that there was a grand jury going on. I was very confident that they would return with an indictment. So I knew that there was going to be an impending arrest, but I had no idea today would be the day. So I'm pleasantly surprised. It's been a long time coming. And now finally somebody's going to be held accountable for Tupac's murder.
And did you think this day would eventually come? What was, I think so many people, were questioning if this day would ever happen.
That was me. I was very skeptical. I began to lose faith that anything would ever happen. But as I became more aware that Vegas was in fact pursuing some closure in the case, they'd done a search warrant a couple of months ago, and I knew there was a grand jury inquiry going on. And so I was encouraged, but now I know, like today, everything came to fruition. So if I had suggested that it would never come, I'm glad I'm wrong.
People are going to say, why did this case take so long? Because it seems, the news conference, they said they knew what happened within days. But here we are, 20 years later, and it took that long to, get this indictment.
There's a saying I'm sure you've heard before, but it's very common in law enforcement. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And so, until they built up enough evidence to prove this in court, which is basically his own confessions now, that's the difference between knowing what happened and being able to prove it.
Is it pretty wild too, just the notoriety of this case, and then to him to go out there and basically incriminate himself? I mean, he's the reason why he was arrested today on that walk. He was out on a walk this morning and got picked up.
Yeah, just they probably wanted to pick him up when he was most vulnerable. They didn't want to go to his house where he might be able to, either take hostage or barricade himself. So they probably had been doing surveillance on him and said, hey, it's time, get him when he's unable to create any more havoc.
Was it crazy for you to see all these things he was saying, the books, the comments? Were you surprised when you started hearing this? Were you like, wait, these are like kind of that moment where it might happen? I mean, he's saying so much.
Yeah, well, it was frustrating because he had been saying so much for so long, and there didn't seem to be any law enforcement response to it. And it was just like, what in the hell? You got somebody out there who's making law enforcement look really bad. People are wondering, how in the hell is this guy out here publicly confessing to the murder of our beloved, to Tupac Shakur, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. And so it's bad optics for law enforcement. Well, today they did their job.
And is there anything you want people to know about this? Like kind of the perspective of it? I mean, you were right there. Is there anything that, people should know, that you want people to know?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's relatively simple. I mean, with Tupac and mostly with Biggie's case, all these big grand conspiracy theories, they're kind of senseless and they don't do any good. They falsely accuse a lot of innocent people. It's a very relatively simple case. This was gang activity within gangs. People don't typically talk. That was the hurdle, the barrier that law enforcement couldn't overcome for a long time. But it's really simple. This was just conflict between Suge and Puffy, conflict between Bad Boy and Death Row, conflict between Biggie and Tupac, conflict between the gangs that they associated with. It was all just internal conflict that was festering, and then until the point where Tupac and Biggie are both murdered. So it's relatively simple, and as we'll see with Tupac's murder case, Keefe's the last man standing.
And it's pretty crazy too. It's so simple, but it just took,
That's the disconnect. That's where it becomes like, well, if it's so simple, why wasn't it solved a long time ago? It's complicatedly simple.
Right. And at this point, you think, after these years, of course, an indictment, people say it's not hard to be indicted, but they have probably the evidence now. Do you believe that he will be convicted in this case? Do you think that's
it's going to be a really interesting legal case to monitor when the star witness is the defendant? He's the evidence against him is his own testimony. It's going to be a really interesting set of circumstances for legal minds to figure out how this works, hopefully, or how it doesn't work.
So the trial might just be just as much of an interest than, the arrest today. It's going to be one of those that the world watches.
Yeah, well, it might be something as simple as this. Call your first witness. We call the defendant to the stand. He gets on the stand. Did you kill Tupac? I invoke the Fifth Amendment. I won't testify against myself. Okay, fine. But we are going to now incorporate everything that you've said in your book, in these podcasts, in these documentaries, now you are testifying against yourself, and the jury's going to get there, and the jury's going to get to sit there and listen and to watch it all.
And last question, do you think he's going to fight this? Do you think he's the type that he's going to let this go to trial, or do you think he's going to just say, hey, it's been this long, what do you think he's going to do? Or do you
Yeah, I don't know that he has the money to fight it. He may get himself a public defender, or he may just say, maybe he tries to cut a deal. Give me second-degree murder. Give me 15 years. Maybe that becomes the plea deal. I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see how he handles it.
All right. Hey, man, well, I really appreciate you taking some time out. Hold on.
I know he's been on one last question. Any message he wants to say to the Shakur family or fans of Tupac?
Oh yeah, like anything that you want to say to the family or just the fans that you've been so involved in this and people watch this so closely. Of course, his family too.
Yeah, I would just apologize. I would say I'm really sorry that it took so long.